Got a good one today. There's a lot of chat at the moment around electric vehicles, particularly with the recent sales results. So we've gone right to the horse's mouth. We have got Aman Gaur on the podcast today, which we're excited to talk to. So Aman is the head of legal policy and advocacy at the Electric Vehicle Council. So today we'll be talking to him about a lot of those topics that people are currently talking about.
So many topics to cover. Me, this is right up my alley, being a EV driver, as I'm sure you haven't heard before. So really excited to hear about the role EVC play across the industry, the partners they're working with, the initiatives that they're working on. I also may have seen Aman on that big BYD cargo ship dropping off a few vehicles. So we'll put that to him as well. But really looking forward to hearing all about the EVC and Aman. He's also had a very interesting career, so it'd be great to sort of dig into that as well as we go.
Yeah, great. Looking forward to this one. Let's get into it.
Let's go.
All right. Today, I'd like to welcome the head of legal policy and advocacy at the Electric Vehicle Council, also known as the EVC, Mr. Aman Gaur, to the podcast. G'day, Aman. How are you, mate?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Brendan and Matt. Lovely to chat to you both today.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming along. We've got a ton of topics to go through today, as everyone seems to be talking about electric vehicles at the moment, particularly on the back of last month's sales numbers. But before we dive into that, keen to know a little bit more about yourself, mate. So tell us a little bit about sort of your career background, your sort of career progression, and then what led you to working with the EVC.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. So I have been at the EVC for about 2 years now, coming on halfway through this year. And before coming to the Electric Vehicle Council, I had a career working in the law. So I worked as a commercial solicitor and then moved into different areas of policy. For a while there, I worked in harm minimization drug policy. So that was a little stint as a policy officer at the Pennington Institute, which was quite an interesting job, and was trying to feel out where I wanted to go sort of in my late 20s. I did a Master's of Public Policy at the London School of Economics because I'd been a lawyer, didn't quite feel that rang true to me. I'd done an economics degree at university at the ANU, and I thought, look, that's probably somewhere where I've got a bit more interest. So I did a Master's of Public Policy around economic policy. And then I came back and spent a couple of years working in politics, which was really just trying to understand how you get good policy and good politics happening at the same time. So that was a really great experience. And then one of the things that I did in that time was advise on energy policy, which I just felt across all the portfolios that I worked on was one of the most, if not the most exciting area, because we were doing so many big things in Australia at that time that it was the area where I felt most intellectually challenged and was the thing that I thought would benefit the country the most. And so when I left the political sphere, ended up working in energy. So I worked for APA, which is one of the larger ASX companies in the gas transmission, and then moved to the EVC. So yeah, a bit of a snaky, windy career, but sort of just tried to follow things that I found interesting and find myself here at the EVC.
Yeah, cool. Is there anything along that career journey that was particularly memorable or challenging, or things that you take with you? And I think you know where I'm going, because we talked off camera about that period of time between late 2019 and early 2022.
Yeah, it's a notable time. I mean, like, I think I've been and tried to do jobs that are interesting. And so like some of the jobs I've done that I've enjoyed is one where I had an amazing opportunity to work for a federal court judge for a year as a sort of a research assistant judicial associate, they called them. That was an amazing job, and that was probably the best job I did until ended up working for the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews for a period of 4 years in the second term between 2019 at the end of 22. And yeah, that was, you're right, like, working in state politics, and often state politics is about delivering things like making sure the trains run on time and the hospitals are well funded and the roads are well maintained. So it's the bread and butter stuff. But it can obviously, at a time like that, as it happened, become very complex and contested. And so, yeah, that was probably the job that, was bloody tough at that time. But it's probably in reflection the best job I've done in terms of, I think, what we were able to achieve at that time and what that government has been able to achieve. So yeah, happy to chat more about that. But yeah, it was definitely at this point in my life probably the best job I've done, and this at the EVC is probably a close second. So I'm sorry, Justice Jessup, you've fallen down to number 3.
I'm sure he'll forgive you. That's all right. We'll let you off the hook with the the later government piece, because I imagine that was quite a challenging time and certainly not foreseeable when you signed on the dotted line.
Yeah, I just come back from the UK and just started working mid 2019. And yeah, 6 months later, we were locked into something that, I think probably the biggest thing I can say is that, like, there was no playbook for the way that was going to unfold. If you remember, I think everyone does. We try not to, really, given the way things went. But we know that, when things were going down overseas here, there was no way of knowing how to address this concern. So people were reacting with it in real time. And I think that's the caution of, like, looking back and saying, we should have done this or we should have done that. There was no policy handbook, or there was no political handbook for dealing with these things until they were happening in your own backyard. So I think it was a good experience, I think, for me, just to reflect on and understand that when things happen in real time, you have to make a decision in that moment about what is the best way to react, and not having all fulsome information ahead of you.
It's a great summary, isn't it? Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Everybody looks back now and it shoulda, coulda, woulda, but it was such a challenging time, I could imagine, in that environment.
100%. Like, so many examples I have myself of not knowing exactly what we knew about the virus at different points, but also how things would be developing overseas. So a great example, if you're familiar with, like, the work around abundance, for example, which is that book that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson put out last year. Derek Thompson, one of the chapters, talks about how one of the great success stories of the Trump presidency was actually adopting a mission-oriented solution to the vaccine. So if you remember, in early 2020, people were saying the vaccine would take 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years. There were some really pessimistic cases. I think they got it out, like the US sort of biomedical industry, led by the support of the government, got it out in under 2 years, right? And that was adopting a really mission-oriented approach. And so simply the point being that there were so many uncertainties, one being how quickly would we get a vaccine, and the numerous companies we had fighting for it. So yeah, pretty interesting time. I think we all experienced there.
Yeah, super interesting time. Definitely. We could talk about that all day. So I won't. We'll move back into the formalized agenda of the EVC. So talk us through the EVC a little bit. So what is the EVC? What's the purpose of the EVC, their mission? And then by extension of that, the case for buying an EV in Australia.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. So the Electric Vehicle Council is the peak industry body for the electrification of cars, trucks and buses in Australia. We've been around for about 10 years, and we were started up by a great man called Behad Jafari. Behad had the idea that really there was a great potential for Australians to get into cheaper to run cars that were electric, and there were good things for the country as well that would come out of that. And obviously, as we all know, like, we've all been driving petrol and diesel cars. Now, everyone on this podcast, and I'm sure many of us listening to the podcast, like, we've historically all just grown up driving petrol and diesel clunkers. And, probably in the last 20 years, the real commercialization idea around EVs has become very apparent to us day to day. So having been around for now 10 years, there are probably a couple of things that we point to as our real, like, success points. The first one is the vehicle efficiency standards. So what's that? It's not just like a boring line. What it actually is a encouragement or incentive for manufacturers to bring electric cars to Australia. So for a long time, we were getting the worst, most polluting petrol diesel cars in Australia because we didn't have a standard. You could really bring in anything you wanted, and you could make Australians pay an obscene amount to drive 1 kilometre or 10 kilometres because the cars were hugely inefficient. So the standard encouraged the manufacturers to bring more efficient petrol cars, but also electric cars because they're zero emissions. And so it operates in a sort of a mechanism that encourages manufacturers to bring in their most efficient cars and drive down the total carbon emissions of our fleet. So that's the first big thing that we always like to claim as one of our big success stories, but there have been other policies such as the electric car discount, which has been really helpful in reducing that EV price premium that people often pay. You still are paying more to buy an EV than you're buying for an ICE vehicle, even though there's cheaper running costs. So the implementation of that and the continuance of that is something that we've worked really hard on. And in recent times, and as the transition gathers pace and moves into different areas, the rollout of charging infrastructure, as well as the move into electrification of freight, these are things that are really emerging in our policy work. So those are some of the things that we worked on. And for everyone out there who's listening, would really encourage you to get in touch with us if you're interested in the EV industry, and jump on our website and have a look at some of the submissions we've put out.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. Yeah, so there's a number of initiatives going on at the moment that keen to talk through today. So I've got a bit of a list here that we'll kind of run through. It'd be awesome to hear your view on what's happening in that space. So you touched on the EV charging infrastructure. That's probably one that people would relate to most. I feel like there's a lot of publicity around that. People are talking about that. Can you talk a little bit about that particular piece of work and the purpose around that?
Yeah, so a couple of, I think, broad things to take out of it. So Australia, it's a bit of a misnomer to compare us to a country like the UK or South Korea, because geographically, we're a really urbanized population with huge distances in between our cities, right? Most Aussies, like I do here, and maybe you do as well, we have off-street parking. And that means we can charge our EVs for the cost of a cup of coffee. Something you can't do if you don't have off-street parking. You're reliant on fast public charging because it is more expensive. You're getting more electrons into your car. So one of the big economic advantages Australians have, like just everyday people, is that we can charge our EVs at a price that is just unbeatable. Like, it's electricity is 4 times cheaper than petrol or diesel, especially diesel, but 4 times cheaper. And we have that advantage because people can charge their EV in their driveway. That's the first thing to appreciate, how it's different from other countries. But yes, we do have large distances where you're driving for hundreds of kilometers and you need to put more electrons into your car really quickly. And so I think the challenge for us as a country is coming up with charging infrastructure that is multifaceted for both apartment charging, for charging on the highway, for charging when you're out and about at the gym, or you're at, getting the weekly groceries done. So charging infrastructure, it has to become more multifaceted and more sort of approachable to everyday Australians in the way we live our lives, not the lives of people living in other countries with different geographies and different lifestyles. So that's the second point. And the third point is, we've seen a massive uptake in EVs in the last year or two. I think the recent data is, if you consider plug-in hybrids and battery electrics as EVs, which we do as per the international standard, 30% of sales are EVs. And we expect that number to be growing in coming months and years. And so charging infrastructure itself has to keep up with that. And that's a great problem to have. But that's one thing we need to see more investment in.
Yeah, for sure. And I know there's that 30% number, but even if you drill in a little bit more, looking at the VFAX numbers for last month, being May 2026, up to 46%. So it seems like that trend is really shooting up at the moment. So which we'll definitely touch on. In relation to the EV charging infrastructure and the policy around that, because we know that there's a number of different stakeholders that are involved in those standards and ensuring that there is a balance between obviously the building side of things, the policy side of things that you're working on, and then the safety side of things. Can you talk a little bit about some of those stakeholders that you're working with and some of the balanced views in order to get the policy right around that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to start off with is that we're building this as the transition happens. So we've historically been driving petrol and diesel cars, where you go to a petrol station, you pump it up and you drive off, and there's hundreds of them. And there's been about a century's worth of building out that network, right? So for a century, we've had petrol stations being built up everywhere to service that demand of almost 20 million cars that we have in Australia. So that's my first point, is as we build this out, it is going to take time. EVs have really only been a consumer, like an everyday Aussie thing, probably this decade, realistically, right? So that's a little bit of, I think, recognition of that, and a bit of patience is required. Secondly, in terms of the work that we do, we work with a whole range of stakeholders, peak bodies, as well as members of ours and other companies to understand what are the different challenges when it comes to EV charging in apartment blocks. So whether it's greenfields or brownfields, so the retrofitting, and I'm really keen to talk to you about some of the things that our members have done to retrofit apartments, where 30% of Aussies live in apartments, and giving them the ability to charge really cheap. But also things like curbside charging. So how do you roll out curbside charging in places like Sydney and Melbourne, which do have a large number of houses that don't have off-street parking? I was in Perth earlier this week meeting with Minister Sanderson, where that's not as much of an issue in Perth because they don't have as much of I don't have as many houses without off-street parking. So it is a bit of a localized thing there as well. So that's another one. And the other thing we talked about, Brendan, earlier is having a workforce that is equipped and in significant number to meet the demands of growing number of EVs. So what you want is you want to be able to get an EV and be able to go service it. EV servicing is cheaper because you've got fewer parts that you've got to get serviced. But if that servicing cost is greater because you can't find the mechanic or it has to be towed into a big city, that's where the costs start to escalate. And it's trying to fix those points that we work on. And certainly we work with the Insurance Council on a reform that was put up in New South Wales around EV mechanics. So we try to work with different organisations. In that case, it was the Motor Trades Association of New South Wales, as well as the Insurance Council, to find just good industry solutions. We're an industry body and we try to represent the views of industry members who want to see the transition happen, but in a way that is sensible and practical from industry perspective.
Yeah, which makes sense. The capability piece is a big one as well. So kind of speaking to the people that we speak to, I know particularly kind of over the last 6 months or so, there's been huge demand in some of the EV specific courses that have come out. I know there's a dedicated certificate 3, and then there's separate modules that you can do in that to start working on it. We know down here in Victoria, it looks like it's going to be mandated for licensed vehicle testers as well, to ensure that they've got the right capability in place, but also the tools. In the EVC's view, do you see that kind of regulation increasing in that space, or more guidance increasing in that space, as it seems like you've already done?
Yeah, we do. I think with regulation, it's always about striking the right balance. Regulation for regulation's sake is not a good thing in my personal opinion, simply because you hold back the ability for people to be able to innovate and filling out paperwork. It's not useful. You've got to demonstrate a need for that regulation. So we do support a regulation that is proportionate and meets the need of the technology as it then stands, not trying to address things that are in the rear vision mirror, things that are of low percentage, or things that may arrive in the future. So those are sort of some overarching comments we have when it comes to regulation. Like, you have, I think, a growing number of people getting into EVs, but I think a lot of this needs to be evidence-based. There's been some concerns around EV fire safety, for example, that are not evidence-based. They're not based in the fact that, on the one hand, you've got a vehicle that literally runs on petrol or combustible fuel and has way more fires that are endogenous, that are coming from the vehicle itself, right? On the other hand, you've got EVs, which run on batteries that are safer, that are much less combustible, or are not combustible in that way. Now, there's obviously a case where when you have an EV fire, you need to have different training skills to deal with that fire. And we completely agree that we should be training our firefighters and our emergency services workers to have the skills and the materials on hand to be able to deal with them. But I think we do need to approach this in like a bit more of a evidence-based way, and trying to isolate the risk by the likelihood of it, as well as the right proportionate response to it. And I think sometimes that's missing because historically EVs have fallen prey to the culture wars, which you never get a good outcome, I think, as soon as anything becomes a victim of culture war.
Yeah, that training piece is really critical, isn't it? Because it's about just ensuring that the knowledge is out there around, if this does occur, what do you do? And what is it? How does it differ from a regular vehicle fire? Because we know that they are, they combust differently. So there's different strategies, different equipment, and all that type of thing. So there's definitely a large piece in there around what does that look like, and ensuring that that's out there, which I believe is actually part of the training that you mentioned earlier as well. I believe they put some of that into those courses too.
Yeah, I think one additional point I'll make is like when it comes to batteries, there are different kinds of batteries. So the battery that goes in your e-scooter is a very different type of battery to the one that goes in your EV. They have different risks in terms of combustion as well as the likelihood of combustion. So, it's a new technology. People have questions. People want to learn more. I completely get that. And that's why our role as the industry body is to provide that evidence around the different risks. The batteries that go into your e-scooter that I know have caused fire and have led the ACCC to issue warnings and to put out protection notices. Those are completely different to your EV, and those are things that are best dealt with by a firefighter who has been trained with the right skills.
Yeah, agree. So you touched on before the retrofitting of the chargers into some existing building. Keen to hear a little bit more about that, because as we know, as kind of population increases in Australia, there's certain suburbs that were very much, your corner block type of housing, which is turning into apartment living. So that's going to become obviously more and more of a trend in terms of how Australians like to live. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about some of those retrofitting activities?
Yeah. Oh, it's one that I'm really pleased to speak about because one of our members, Knox, we worked with Knox on what's called a knowledge sharing partnership. So Arena funded a piece of work for Knox to look at how do you get trickle charging. So trickle charging is basically the concept. I can see you guys nodding, but for people who aren't across the concept, it's like you basically plug in your EV to charge overnight, the same way you might charge up your phone, like take it like that, right? And it's the cheapest, most sustainable way to be charging up your car. Now, obviously, you can't do that. You may not be able to do that if you live in an apartment and you don't have a power point right next to your parking spot in your garage in your apartment block. And often to retrofit a block can cost so much because you have to go into the pre-existing infrastructure to make changes which may be shared across other owners and creates issues with owners corporations. It's just a whole heap of issues that, how do you navigate them as more and more Aussies choose to live in sort of apartments. So Knox has a great solution that is out if you're from Melbourne and listening online. It's in Hawthorne. And so I was out there with Knox and a couple of ministers and local politicians a couple of months ago talking about this solution, which basically has, if you can imagine, you've got a car park inside an apartment block, and you've got essentially this thing hangs down of a metal pole and it's got electricity socket on it, and you just plug your your charger into it and the other side into your car, and off you go and you're charging up. Now you only pay for what you use, so it also changes the equation when people say, well, I don't want to be paying for the electricity that you're using when I don't drive an EV and we live in the same apartment block. So it's user pays, which is fantastic. If you get the benefit, you should pay. So Knox has got this solution. It's rolling out across the country. I know there are other people out there who are sort of innovating on this, and that's what we want to see. Is there's like a burgeoning set of companies who are trying to solve the problems that are unique to, well, not unique, but like Australian when it comes to the EV rollout.
Yeah, that's interesting. The pay per use, I didn't think about that, because if I think about some of my friends that live in apartments, how it'll quite often be, I don't know the terminology for it, but there is an electrical provider and that's it. Like you don't change, that is the building, and there is a level of shared electrical usage. So to be able to isolate that, and then of course from a structural perspective, thinking about like some of the concrete cores that are poured and trying to get through that after it's already constructed, that would in itself present a number of challenges.
Yeah, exactly. So it's you don't want to be ripping up concrete and rewiring the thing, as well as sharing costs across people who aren't using it. So that's why the Knox solution is so appealing, and that's why when we did the knowledge sharing partnership with them, it shows the benefit of having a user pays model that's really cheap to implement. It doesn't cost thousands of dollars, and obviously it's really easy to use. And that's the first thing I think when it comes to something like trickle charging. It basically replicates what you have when you have a car park, and you can just go home, plug it in. You're done.
Yeah, cool. Makes them feel like a supercar owner as well, I imagine, because I know that all the people with their toys in their garage are usually trickle charging their Ferraris and the like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, before we jump into some of the other initiatives, Matt, conscious I've been talking for quite some time and taking up all the airspace. Anything that you wanted to ask?
No, nothing from me at this point. No, keep going.
Keep flowing, keep flowing. Just let me know if I'm waffling on too much. So with the increase of EV uptake, low income earners, I know that's something that the EVC is actively working on as well. It would be great to hear some of the initiatives in and around that piece.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate this. This is definitely a passion of ours because like we're very realistic about the fact that EVs started out as something that rich Australians could afford because of the price point that they were at. And that's the case with most technology. Like remember when the first iPhone came out? It was hella expensive. Like I was growing up when it first came out, I was like, I'm never going to be able to have one of those things. But obviously now, not only has the price come down, but there's payment plans that allow it to be more accessible. And now you don't meet anyone who doesn't have one. It's always weird when someone doesn't have an iPhone or a smartphone. Same sort of thing with this. Like what we've got now is 10 models that are available under $40,000. The average EV across all the segments is roughly $65,000. That is a little bit more than what you would pay for a petrol car. So, across the SUV category, which is Australia's most popular category, as I'm sure you can tell as soon as you put your head outside your door, you're paying a little bit more for a EV SUV. But in the small car segment, like a hatchback like I have, it's basically the same price. And then in that sort of commercial vehicle market, your utes, for example, we do need to see more entry and we need to see more competition, but it is emerging. So that's healthy to see as well. Nevertheless, buying a new car is not something that most Aussies do. Like, I think the stat is that 3/4 of people buy their car secondhand. Like, only 1/4 of Aussies buy their cars new. So that's an interesting thing to just bring to this conversation. That means that most people, when they have a car, they get it from their parents, right? When they're young, they have a car that they buy in their 20s or 30s when their first car clonks out, or they end up buying a second car that suits like their family needs to go off-road camping or whatever, right? So people buy cars at different points in their life. But one of the things that we know is that cars are the second most important asset you'll ever buy. And a lot of people buy them, on repayment plans that obviously are expensive themselves as well. So that is some of the structural stuff. The key insight that we try to bring to it is that poorer Australians generally spend about 6 times as much of their income proportionally on transport costs like petrol as richer Australians. And that makes sense, right? Like it's a absolute essential when you live in a country like Australia to drive a car. And so it's an essential good. You're going to end up spending more of your money on something like that than you would on a luxury good. So that's a fact of life. The question for us is, what are the policies government could be putting in place to make it easier for people to spend less money on transport? So obviously, getting on PT, that's a great solution. Not a solution for everyone. I grew up in Frankston in Melbourne, and we didn't have many forms of public transport, so you're really car dependent. And so one of the policies we are considering we've been talking a lot about is an EV lease to own program modeled on a French policy where low-income Aussies and essential workers who are spending a lot of money on transport get to lease a car at a really affordable rate per month. At the end of that rate, they get to own that car. So basically they move off having a really expensive, as you know, guys know, being in the insurance industry, very expensive to maintain ICE vehicle. Let's call it your 1998 Corolla, like I used to own once. And sometimes it'll cost you like $2,000 to upkeep when you're into the mechanic, to getting into an EV that saves you $3,000 per year, plus the servicing is lower. And hopefully we address those insurance and servicing problems. So that's one of the ways we're trying to make the transition more equitable.
What happened to the Corolla? It was living in Frankston.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
Like by the theft rate, or
I think everyone has great stories about the first cars that they had, right? So, like, we moved to Australia when I was a kid at about the age of 7, and the first car we ever drove was a Nissan Bluebird, and it didn't have the ability to go into reverse. So for a while there, my dad was driving it around with only the ability to go forward. Led to some hairy situations around the streets of Adelaide. And then at some point, we picked up a little Toyota Corolla that I ended up driving a lot through my teenage years. And I think that car, well, I'll put it to this way: when I handed that car down to my brother, he put paid to that poor car.
It's good life advice though from the old Bluebird. Just keep moving forward. Like, don't look back. Just take the lessons. Keep
it's
moving
very
forward.
Philosophical, eh?
It is a special vehicle when you think about it. But no, I shouldn't joke now. Yeah, oh, big time. I shouldn't joke about it. I too am in the lovely city of Frankston, and I too am familiar with the public transport And for some reason, the stop all stations on the Frankston line, it's like, why is it always stop all stations? Why
I
does it
know.
take me longer to get into the city than people that live 2 hours north of Melbourne? It doesn't make a
Yeah.
huge amount of sense to
How
me.
many stations are there? Like 18 between Southern Cross and Frankston?
Yeah, something like that. 39, I think, is the last I counted.
Yeah.
26 of which are suburbs I've never heard of. But
Good memories. I'm glad to hear a Frankston boy too. It's once you're from the peninsula or once you live down there, it's a shared bond.
yeah, Peninsula. I'll call it the Peninsula. Makes it sound
Yeah, nice.
a little bit higher brow than what it may actually be. But anyway, vehicle to grid is another one. So this is something that obviously we were talking about the other week, and I hadn't heard of it before, and it's pretty exciting. And I know Matt knows a little bit about this one as well. I think there was a recent success story as well, but yeah, interested to hear about the vehicle to grid initiative too.
Yeah. So I'll just take a step back because it's really at the frontier of technology, and I think a lot of people, sometimes we assume that people know about these technologies, which they might not. So to take a step back, EVs are generally, like, the best way to think about an EV is a big battery with wheels. So it's a big battery, and if you've got a home battery listening along at home, if you're taking advantage of the cheaper home batteries program, an EV batteries sometimes 5 to 8 times the size of your home battery. So that's what we're talking about, a really big condensed amount of energy. And you got wheels on it, and you got a really great infotainment system, and it's a fun thing to drive. That's fantastic. So generally the way it works is you get energy from the socket into your car and off you go. What vehicle to grid is the ability to take energy from your car and put it back into the grid, or to put it back into your house, or to run, your camper site when you're off in the country or whatever. So basically it's the idea that the energy that's in your car can be moved around to different things, and you can use it how you want, when you want. So it goes both ways. And some really great examples of this, guys, like we've heard of, like, when there's been situations around natural disasters, people in Tassie, people in Queensland, when the floods were there, I think last year, used their cars to power their own houses and the houses of their neighbors, and kept them going for days on end, because that's how much energy, coming back to my initial point, is in an EV battery. So that's what vehicle to grid is simply the idea that your car has a huge amount of energy as well, and that can be moved around. Now, in terms of making that a thing, there's trials at the moment on what does that mean for the EV battery itself. So there's trials being run out by Amber, by Origin, by AGL, I believe, as well, and with different manufacturers to see, over a long period of time, what do we learn about the way this works and what the outcomes are. We think it's a really promising thing to go through in terms of the trials, and we're really keen to see what vehicle to grid could mean. There are several benefits if we have successful trials and vehicle to grid becomes a significant part of how people use their cars. First of all, it means you can make money. Like, we love making money. Everyone loves being charged their solar panels. So you remember, you got that, middle-aged dad who's just looking at his solar panels going, this is how much money I'm making at the moment. Well, that's kind of what you can do with an EV when you're doing vehicle to grid. Some of the modeling we've done shows that you could earn up to $1,500 a year by having the ability to put energy back into the grid. So that's the first thing. The second one is having energy independence. So when you got, there's a natural disaster, you can run your own house, and you can basically secure yourself and your family off it. And the third thing is simply the ability for energy to be what the energy wonks called distributed or consumer energy resources, but basically means that we are now the ability to have millions of Aussies with big batteries at their homes, means that you don't need to rely so much on a coal generator, or hopefully not at all, but on gas peaking plants and so forth, and energy can be distributed across the country. So it's a bit more of a national community goal type of outcome, but the first two certainly holds a lot of promise for people in their everyday lives.
It makes so much
It's
sense.
really good. It does, doesn't it? As a EV vehicle driver myself, it sort of is it's dispelling that myth to start with, that you think you've got to get a battery, you fill your battery up in your house, and then you can charge your car. And then finally you sort of realize that the battery in your vehicle is 7 times larger than what you could put on a wall. So it's dispelling that myth that a lot of people I talk to still ask me, how do you charge, from solar or batteries? And no, it's solar into the car and vehicle to grid. It's such a great technology that when it actually lands and it's out with the masses, it's going to be very powerful.
I think that's such a big part of it, Matt. Like, really great to hear that you're doing it and you're talking to your mates about it, because I think where we're at now in the transition is we're really lucky that there's heaps of people like you who have got EVs and who are doing vehicle to grid or have a home battery. And a large part of getting over that inertia about should I just stay with a petrol car or move into an EV is having your mate at the pub, or your kids' friends, dad tell you, oh look, I bought an EV and it worked for me and this is all the benefits. It's that trust that comes from someone that you know. So fantastic to hear that you're doing that in your life as well.
Thank you, mate. We just got to work on our podcast host here. He's not quite a convert as of yet, but I'm sure after this conversation, he'll be rushing down to Tesla to grab a brand new Model Y, perhaps.
But it's only Australia's most popular car last month, so there's not much pressure.
That's right.
It was. I remember when Matt got his. Admittedly, I was quite impressed with the shape of it. I thought I was this close to buying one, and then he turned up one day with roof racks, and it was over for me. Over. Just, I'm not sure why you would do that to the natural lines of that machine, but each to their own. Each their own. I'll stick with my diesel.
Yeah.
But I love the use cases that you talk to. The obviously again insurance guys, like the natural hazard use case. What a ripper! Like if some sort of huge event comes through, knocks out traditional electricity source, having that ability not just to be able to get things up and going for yourself, but neighbors and others. Like, what a great use case! And immediately my mind is already racing with. I've got good friends that are going camping all the time, caravanners that are going and they're taking these big solar panels, which are difficult to transport. It may not eliminate them, but just having that ability, that other electricity source that you could utilize, heaps of use cases.
I think that's right. I think there's so many things. I've just mentioned 3 of them there, but I think that ability to have complete independence, like if something happens, and we're seeing more natural disasters. So especially if you're living in Queensland, we see things happening up there probably on a greater scale than we used to. So I think that's why in part we're seeing people realize that, by getting an EV, I'm not just getting a cheaper ride every day, but I'm getting the ability to be genuinely off-road. People used to say, one particular man used to say EVs will kill the weekend. Well, in fact, they're making the weekend more affordable, but they're also making the weekend like more durable, because you can go and run the entire weekend off your EV.
Actually, it's interesting, Pugliese, as you were talking about that. I was thinking of food spoilage claims. Natural event, a disaster hits, and insurance companies are paying thousands of food spoilage claims. Imagine everyone's plugged back into their Tesla, fridge stays on, no more food spoilage claims. Thing of the past. Problem solved.
I can see as we talk through all these things, Brendan's doing the calculations and he's thinking through how quickly can I get down and maybe buy that EV.
Yeah. How much do I need to spend to protect my 4 and 20 frozen pies in my freezer?
Lobster. That's your Tasmanian lobster and oysters and
crayfish, please, Matthew. There's someone else actually, Matt, that you were telling me about with the pie warmer in the back of their car. That would be unbelievable to run the pie warmer.
That's a great idea. It's a great idea. On a cold Melbourne day, just to have a pie warmer in the back going. Yep.
The other one that and I saw, tucking back into what you were talking about earlier as well, that infrastructure piece. Obviously, it all goes hand in hand, doesn't it? So it's like if you're going to have these situations where you can rely on your EV battery, you've got to make sure that the infrastructure's there, it's right, there's the right safety protocols around it to facilitate that type of lifestyle and that functionality. But moving along, the other interesting piece that we were talking about, and again, Australia is so big, it relies very heavily on road logistics, road transport, large trucks. So I understand there's an initiative in and around that, around looking to move those logistics businesses, those trucks into more electricity powered vehicles.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, look, what's been happening the last couple of months has probably woken a lot of us up to how dependent we are on a fuel that we don't have in our country, that we import, and we are at the end of the importation. Like we're right at the end of everyone who's asking for a bit of it. By the time it gets to us, it's really expensive and it's taking a long time. So obviously everyone's thinking, well, how else could we run our economy, one, more sustainably in terms of just having access to something when we want it, but two, for cheaper. So we import 90% of our fuels, right? So petrol, diesel, we import 90% of that. Now, of that amount that gets imported, 50% is diesel. That might surprise people to know how much of the total amount is actually diesel, but obviously, we have people who run trucks, but we also have farmers who run their vehicles on diesel as well, and we have diesel cars. So a lot of it is diesel. Now, focusing just on the freight sector, I think we have this like popular imagination that the only trucking that happens in Australia is like between big cities, and you got a guy drinking a carton of big Triple M, and he's doing a big 15-hour drive, and that's definitely the a part of the trucking sector in terms of road freight. But a large part of the trucking sector is also roughly about 30 to 40% is you're driving around suburban Melbourne doing drop-offs for furniture, or doing the Woolies drop-off, or doing the any other sort of goods that are being carried around by a light commercial vehicle. And that's the first point of electrification. And the reason, Brendan, I think that's really important is, most of us live in cities which, when you're driving that diesel truck, it's polluting the air that you're running in. It's polluting the air that your kids are breathing in. And in terms of putting the costs on that, the University of Melbourne recently calculated that was costing us, in terms of having to fix up the healthcare system, $6.6 billion a year, right? So think about like how much we're having to pay as taxpayers to fix the harms that are coming from diesel in our own suburbs, putting to one side, just how like uncomfortable it is to have diesel fumes go past you every time a truck goes past. So that can be electrified straight away. And so we have members like IKEA who have a really ambitious and are achieving an ambitious goal to electrify their last mile delivery. We have members like ANC who are subcontractors that provide that service. We have a lot of manufacturers like Daimler and Volvo who are involved in that segment of the market. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention is like, let's rethink what we're trying to electrify. And a large part of that is last mile delivery. And then when we talk about the bigger ones, there's some really exciting things happening in, I guess, higher, bigger freight, let's say. And I think that's probably an area that where technologically people have been saying, how about hydrogen? Can that be the solution? That's more energy dense, it'll more commercially feasible, and it hasn't so far worked out. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but so far it hasn't been practical. And what we are seeing is that with more competition in the freight sector, there are greater opportunities to electrify higher forms, higher tonnage of freight, and address some of the concerns that we have about sort of interstate deliveries.
So we mentioned earlier about the uptake of EVs. And what was it last month that said 46% or something along those lines? Was that something that was foreseeable by the EVC?
Yeah.
What do you guys see as some of the drivers in behind that increase?
It's a great question. It's one that we've sort of been grappling with, is this a temporary shift or is this a structural shift in what's happening? I'll just take a step back and say the 46% number, it reflects a car that has a degree of electrification. So it includes petrol hybrid. So a petrol car that has a non-recharging electric motor, which is good. Like, starting point, it's good because you're using less petrol. We like things that use less petrol, so we'll support that to a degree. The electrified portion of those sales is, I think of last month, 20% were electric, battery electric, and 10% were plug-in hybrid, if I'm not mistaken. And that's been the number for about 2 or 3 months roughly. But I think let's just take a big look at this. So the AAA puts out data on the way that Aussies are buying different cars. And over the last 2 years, the number of pure petrol and diesel cars has just fallen off a cliff. Like, I'm pretty confident in the next month or two, less than 50% of sales will be for pure petrol and electric cars. And 2 years ago, it was about 82% or something. So Aussies are flicking the switch on it and saying goodbye to petrol and diesel purely. That's the first thing. Secondly, there's been that was to sort of answer your first point. Like, this has been happening for a while. This is not just a Persian Gulf War situation that meant the people are moving into electric. This has been happening for at least 2 years. It's just been gradual. It hasn't been, as dramatic as people might want for newspaper headlines. The second thing I'd say is, in terms of the future, well, what we've seen is with the vehicle efficiency standards, there's been an upward trajectory of pure battery electrification for probably the last 2 or 3 years, because more and more models are affordable. So as I mentioned, 10 models under 40,000. The average price has been coming down. There's good incentives in terms of the electric car discount. There's more charging infrastructure. So what we see in terms of coming up in the future is we do expect to see more EV sales, because just like Matt's doing the Lord's work speaking to his friends about the benefits of getting into an EV, especially a vehicle to grid one, we got more and more people spreading that good word. So no, I can't claim to be a crystal ball gazer and say that we predicted the war, but I think we've always been saying that, once the efficiency standards were in place, the benefits of electrification would be really apparent to people.
Yeah.
Tell you what, Aman, that big ship, the BYD ship that landed, how much publicity did that create? I was hearing that every feed, everyone you were talking to, it was phenomenal, wasn't it?
Well, we were there, and I was just on a
Oh, yeah.
side when I was sick the previous day, and I was like, damn, this is not the time to get the traditional Melbourne flu, but I got to get on that ship. I've got to be there. So took a couple of newer friends and took a spoonful of concrete, as you might say, and got on it. And I tell you what, ships are bloody cold. I've parked there in the Melbourne dock. It's a big ship. It's intimidating. I think it was great for showing a couple of things. One, that the amount of interest reflects how much enthusiasm there is in the country for electrification. Things don't just make it on the front page of The Age for 3 days in a row unless editors think that it's going to be of interest to people. So it's not just something that can be artificially created. It reflects the community sentiment for wanting to get into electric cars. The second thing, and BYD is a member of ours, and we love them for supporting electrification. What's interesting about that is that boats come in all the time. Like, that's not special in itself. What was interesting about that was BYD was able to bring that shipment in, because that's one of 6 boats they own and operate themselves. So those boats we got told by the global vice president, he was there on the day, go between South America and Europe generally, and they said, well, look, there's so much demand. What we're going to do is we're going to prioritize this boatload, this boat and this boatload for essential workers in Australia, which I think was a fantastic thing because of the points I mentioned earlier about these nurses and cops and firefighters who are having to drive shitty petrol cars. Well, let's get them into electric cars. So they diverted one of their ships. So yeah, really great media, but it was reflecting just the interest that's in the community around it.
For sure. My assumption is that you had to be there to break the champagne over the front of the boat when it turned up to dock.
If only. No, I did get to go into the captain's thing where everyone took turns at pulling down on the horn. That was that was definitely a bucket list thing. I'll say that.
The neighbours down in Port Melbourne would have been loving that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you get for buying water views, I guess.
Yeah, in Melbourne. How dare you?
The biggest EV ship that Victoria's seen for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, the uptake is definitely real. Even just driving around the roads, walking on the street, you see them everywhere. I know, I'm not sure how, but somehow I got drawn into, I think it's because Matt keeps talking about his Tesla, but I got drawn into the Jayco advertising. I think they were advertising it for there could be, I think it was the J5 for,
Yes.
It was an introductory offer, 27K and change with a 1.8% interest rate on it. And they look like Range Rovers drive around. My understanding is Cherry has some sort of a deal with them. So they're good looking machines. And that is very affordable.
Yeah,
obviously.
it's a really competitive car. I was just out before and I saw one on the road and I thought I did recognize it, and I was like, that is a good looking car for what is now retailing as 36. So this goes to your point, right, Brendan? It's such an affordable proposition to buy, and then you realize the fact that on our numbers, if you're driving the average 13,000 kilometers a year, you're saving $3,000 a year. And who wouldn't love to have that $3,000 to spend on a holiday overseas at this time of year rather than on petrol?
For sure. No, it's good looking car, that one. Drove past, I thought it was the Beckhams, but it wasn't. It was just another Frankston resident.
How much more evidence do you need, BG, to buy one? Huh?
That's yeah. It's stacking up. It's stacking up, but the roof racks was a problem. So thinking about the future, like where does EVC see themselves in the future? Where do they see kind of the EV trajectory moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I think the big question here is like, why? Why should we be doing this? Like, why should people be buying an EV, apart from the money you might save? So Australia has a target of 5 million EVs on the road by 2035. Like, why are we doing that? Well, I think the first reason is it's the carbon emissions. So every time you burn, obviously carbon dioxide goes into the air, makes our planet, makes our country hotter, more uncomfortable. Not really a place you want to be living as it gets worse, right? So carbon emissions from petrol and diesel cars, or just transport sector, as we say, are actually the hardest to abate or to get rid of. And so electrification and moving into electric cars is the best option we have at the moment, rather than, say, going down the hydrogen path. That's the obvious reason why we're trying to get off it. But I think what's actually happened in the last couple of years is there are not bigger, but there are equally important reasons to consider. So we mentioned in this conversation, the energy security path. So not being dependent on foreign countries who may or may not be our friends next year. And I think Australians realize more and more regularly that geopolitically it's an unsafe or uncertain world, right? And do we want to be dependent on other countries, or do we want to have the ability to use the Australian sun to run our country cheaper, for the reason that electricity is cheaper? Or do we want to keep doing things we've been doing for the last 100 years in a pretty uncertain world? That's the second thing. And I think the third thing just goes back to the hip pocket. So yeah, why would any old mug want to spend more for the same thing when you can have something that costs you less? And if you look at the ANCAP safety ratings, the majority of the cars at the top of the ANCAP safety ratings are EVs, and there's a couple of structural reasons for that. But that's yet another reason why we should be pursuing what we want to do in the future. So those are probably the three reasons that we like to chat about most in terms of where to go from here. And so it's that 5 million EVs target, but it's also about how to electrify freight and try and get the country to run more electric trucks and buses as well.
Yeah, awesome. Very insightful. Well, that's all the questions that I had. Matt, was there anything else that you had for Aman before I jump into who potentially we would like to have next on the podcast? No, nothing? All right. Then, Aman, I can't remember if we put this question to you before to give you time to think about it. But one thing that we always ask people when we're talking to them is, who should we invite on next? Who would you like to hear from on this podcast?
Yeah, I think, look, a lot of the things that we've touched on here is the way that the car sector is changing in Australia. I think that's something that people are seeing every time they step out of their house. I think it'd be lovely if you guys spoke to an OEM, like a manufacturer in Australia, who is in that world, that emergent world. So I think it'd be fantastic if you got Tom Drew from Tesla on, who's the country director, and he could talk to you about all the great things Tesla's trying to do, and maybe convince you to buy an EV with roof racks, Brendan. So Tom's a fantastic guy. I think he's someone you guys should hit up.
I'd be interested to hear his view on the roof racks, because I feel like he would be very aligned with me.
They're Tesla. They're Tesla approved roof racks, just to clarify.
Yeah, they are. They're not aftermarket. They're not spot welded on from some guy in his garage. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Aman. Really appreciate your time. As I said at the start of the podcast, EVs is a big talking point at the moment. They're all over the news. That ship was absolutely everywhere. They're on the car, all over the road, of course. So it was very, very good to talk to somebody at the absolute pointy end of the industry, somebody that's heavily involved in everything that's going on, and hearing all your thoughts and insights and what's happening for the future. So again, thank you very much. Very much appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your interest, guys. Lovely chatting to you.
And another one, I can't believe it, BG. I say this all the time, but that was an hour. Flew. Can't believe how interesting that was hearing from Aman. I can't believe a couple of things. I can't believe you're going to buy a Tesla. That is a great outcome. Aman just brought so much evidence, so many facts, and just so many insights as to why we as Australians should really be caring about our country and electrifying the vehicles on the road. It's a great path forward. We've seen the uptick, and just so many good segues and insights and discussion topics in that one. A cracker, a real cracker.
Yeah, I'd like to think I'm really across the sort of EV movements in the industry, but yeah, obviously talking to Aman, there's a lot of stuff going on that I wasn't aware of and really exciting stuff. The vehicle to grid initiative, I love that idea. I love that idea. If you're carrying around a
No more
battery,
food spoilage. No more food spoilage.
no more food spoilage. You heard it here first. But really good. But even talking about some of those infrastructure projects as well, really fascinating. Like that's complex. That's really complex. There's a lot of stakeholders that they would be working with to form those policies and make sure that they're right. I loved
complex.
Very complex, but very balanced. I liked how Aman was talking about not just the path to getting these things installed or built or whatever it may be, but also talking about what is required to support that. So he obviously talked about the technical shortage at the moment from a mechanical standpoint.
Yeah.
So getting in behind that, he talked about the emerging safety risks and some of the controls in and around that, which is really important. Talked obviously about the low income earners, which is fascinating, and hearing about some of the pricing in the market at the moment to get some low income earners in. It's just some really fascinating stuff. He is across a lot.
This thing's up for 30 grand now. You can get a fully electrified or hybrid vehicle. So that cost of entry is now reducing, and that the old stigma around charging infrastructure and range and so forth is really starting to dissipate. So it's good to hear Aman talking to that. And I think for the audience out there, particularly across the insurance sector, there's so many unknowns when it comes to EVs. They've been treated for so long as a vehicle with a battery, and it's a very different class type, to the standardized vehicles, from repair, how you handle them, how you should be writing premiums, and what you should be doing as an insurer and as a supplier to the insurance trade. So another really great episode today.
Yeah, agree. And one thing that is undeniable is battery-powered vehicles aren't going anywhere. You heard from Aman that too. Obviously, there's a lot of noise in the news at the moment around the volumes, but this is a 2-year trend. It is only going to continue.
It's been building. Yeah, it's been building, hasn't it, to this point? So the only question that needs answering is, when are you buying an electric vehicle, Brendan?
Thanks everyone for listening in. Very much appreciate everyone's time.
He's shouldered arms on that one. He's dodged that one again.
Very, very happy with the fake AMG on diesel at the moment. So, but if things change, you'll be the first to know.
Can't wait.